For 35 years, I hosted every single Christmas dinner for our family. I cooked for 20 people, decorated my entire house, and spent thousands of dollars making sure everyone had the perfect holiday. Last year, I decided it was time to pass the torch to my children. This December, I found out they had their first family Christmas party, and I wasn't invited. I'm Martha. I'm 68 years old, and this is how I discovered my own family thought Christmas was better without me. Before I tell you this story, I need to ask you something. Have you ever felt unappreciated by your own family? Have you ever given everything to people you love, only to have them treat you like you don't matter? If this sounds familiar, hit that like button right now because you're going to relate to every word of what I'm about to share. And if you want to hear more real stories about family drama and standing up for yourself, make sure you subscribe and ring that notification bell. Trust me, after you hear what my own children did to me, you'll want to stick around for the ending. Now let me take you back to where this all began. It was 1989, and I was a young mother of three. My husband, Robert, had just gotten a promotion, and we'd bought our first real house. It had a big dining room, a kitchen with enough counter space for days of cooking, and a living room that could fit the whole extended family. My mother-in-law, God rest her soul, had been hosting Christmas for decades. But that year, she was getting too old to handle all the work, the cooking, the cleaning, the decorating. It was becoming too much for her. She looked at me during Thanksgiving dinner and said, "Martha, honey, I think it's time someone younger took over Christmas." I was terrified. 23 people coming to my house for Christmas dinner? I'd never cooked for more than 6 people in my life. But Robert squeezed my hand under the table and said, "If anyone can do it, it's my wife." So I threw myself into it completely. I spent weeks planning menus, testing recipes, figuring out how to time everything perfectly. I bought new dishes, new decorations, new everything. I wanted our first Christmas to be perfect, and it was. Everyone raved about the food. The children played in the backyard while the adults talked and laughed around my dining room table. My mother-in-law pulled me aside and said, "Martha, you've found your calling. This family has never had a Christmas this beautiful." That's when I knew I had something special, not just the ability to cook and decorate, but the gift of bringing people together, making them feel loved, wanted, important. Every single person who walked through my door on Christmas Day felt like they were coming home. Year after year, I got better at it. I learned everyone's favorite dishes. I remembered which cousins didn't get along and seated them far apart. I bought gifts for everyone, even the plus ones and new boyfriends. I made sure no one ever felt left out. The preparations became my favorite part of the whole year. Starting in October, I'd begin planning. November was for shopping and early decorating. December was pure magic, baking cookies, wrapping presents, turning my house into a winter wonderland. My children grew up thinking this was normal, that every family had a mother who spent 3 months preparing for one perfect day. They had no idea how much work went into making Christmas look effortless. John, my oldest, would bring different girlfriends each year until he met Julie. Veronica, my daughter, started bringing her husband Martin and their babies. Danny, my youngest, was in the military, but he always got leave to come home for Christmas. The family kept growing. Grandchildren arrived. The guest list went from 23 to 30, then 35, then 40 people. I had to start borrowing tables and chairs from the church. But I loved every minute of it. People started calling me the Christmas Queen. Family members would ask in July if they could bring someone new to Christmas dinner. Neighbours would drive by just to see my decorations. Other families in town started trying to copy what I did, but they could never quite get it right. You see, it wasn't just about the food or the decorations. It was about making everyone feel like they belonged to something bigger than themselves, like they were part of a legacy that would continue long after I was gone. Every Christmas Eve, I'd stay up until 3 a.m. putting the finishing touches on everything, setting the tables with my grandmother's china, arranging the gifts under the tree, making sure every detail was perfect. Christmas morning, I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to start the turkey and all the side dishes. By the time people arrived at noon, everything looked effortless. The house smelled like cinnamon and pine. Christmas music played softly in the background. The fireplace was lit, casting a warm glow over everything. But behind all that perfection was one woman who sacrificed her own Christmas morning every year to make sure 40 other people had the most magical day possible. The first sign something was changing came about 5 years ago. I was in my early 60s then, still strong, still energetic, still loving every minute of Christmas preparation. But I started noticing little comments from my children. "Mum, you don't have to go so overboard with the decorations," Veronica would say when she came to help with the tree. "Maybe we should have a simpler menu this year," John suggested when I showed him my list of 15 different side dishes. At first, I thought they were being considerate, worried about me working too hard. I'd just laugh and tell them that Christmas was my joy, my gift to the family, that I wouldn't have it any other way. But the comments kept coming, and they got more pointed. "It's really becoming a burden for you, isn't it, Mum?" Julie, John's wife, said one day while I was explaining how to fold the napkins correctly. "Maybe it's time to scale back a bit." Martin, Veronica's husband, suggested when he saw me struggling to carry in boxes of decorations from the garage. I started to feel like they were seeing me as old and weak, instead of the capable woman who had been creating magic for their family for 3 decades. It hurt, but I pushed those feelings down. They meant well, I told myself. The year I turned 66, things got worse. John forgot to RSVP for his family until 2 weeks before Christmas. Veronica showed up late and complained that the house was too hot. Danny brought his new girlfriend without telling me, and I had to scramble to find an extra chair and place setting. For the first time in 33 years, Christmas dinner didn't go smoothly. People seemed distracted, checking their phones, leaving early to go to other parties. The magic felt forced, like everyone was just going through the motions. After everyone left, I sat in my living room, surrounded by dirty dishes and crumpled wrapping paper, and I cried. Really cried, for the first time in years. Robert found me there and held me while I sobbed. "They don't appreciate what you do," he said quietly. "They take it for granted." "No," I said, defending my children the way mothers always do. "They're just busy. They have their own lives now. It's natural." But deep down, I was starting to wonder if he was right. The next year was even worse. People complained about the food, too salty, too sweet, too traditional. They criticized the decorations, too much, too old-fashioned, too cluttered. They seemed annoyed by my attempts to organize group photos and family games. I started to feel like a hostess, desperately trying to please ungrateful guests, instead of a mother sharing her love with her family. But the breaking point came during the cleanup. I was in the kitchen, washing dishes and packing up leftovers like I'd done for 34 years. Usually, the women of the family would help, chatting and laughing while we cleaned up together. That year, I could hear them in the living room, talking in hushed tones. I turned off the water to listen. "She's really getting too old for this," I heard Julie say. "The whole thing is becoming such a production," Veronica added. "It's exhausting just being here." "Maybe we should say something," Martin suggested, "for her own good." My own good? I'd been sacrificing my own Christmas morning for their happiness for over 3 decades, and now they thought it was for my own good to stop? I turned the water back on and finished the dishes in silence, my heart breaking with every plate I washed. That night, after everyone had gone home and Robert was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table and really looked at what my Christmas had become. The joy was gone. The gratitude was gone. Instead of feeling appreciated, I felt like a burden. The people I'd poured my heart into for 35 years were treating my greatest gift to them like an obligation they had to endure. I made a decision that night. If they thought Christmas was too much work for me, if they thought I was too old to handle it, if they were so tired of my production, then maybe it was time to let them take over. Maybe it was time to see if they could do better. The conversation I'd been dreading finally happened in March. John called and asked if he could come over with Veronica to talk about Christmas plans for next year. I knew what was coming. I'd seen the looks, heard the whispers, felt the growing impatience with my traditions, so I decided to beat them to it. "I've been thinking the same thing," I said when they sat down in my living room. "I'm getting older, and Christmas has become quite a big undertaking. Maybe it's time for the younger generation to take over." The relief on their faces was unmistakable. They tried to hide it, but I saw it. They were happy to be free of their obligation to participate in my Christmas. "Are you sure, Mom?" Veronica asked, but her tone was more excited than concerned. "Absolutely," I lied smoothly. "It will be wonderful to see what you young folks can create. I'm sure you'll come up with something much more modern and manageable." We spent the next hour talking about logistics. Who would host? How would we divide responsibilities? What traditions did they want to keep? John volunteered to host at his house. He had the biggest dining room, and Julie was apparently excited about the opportunity to put her own spin on things. Veronica would handle the desserts and decorations. Danny would coordinate with the extended family. They asked what I wanted to contribute, and I said I'd bring a side dish, like any other guest. They seemed surprised by this, like they hadn't quite thought through the fact that I'd go from doing everything to being just another attendee. "What about your china?" Julie asked. "And all your decorations?" "We could borrow them if you don't mind." I minded very much. My grandmother's china, my collection of ornaments gathered over 4 decades, my tablecloths and centerpieces, these weren't just decorations. They were pieces of my heart, memories made tangible. But I smiled and said, "Of course, dear. Whatever you need." Over the next few months, they'd call occasionally with questions. How did I make the stuffing? What was the recipe for the cranberry sauce? Could they borrow my large roasting pans? Each question felt like another piece of myself being divided up and distributed. They wanted my knowledge, my equipment, my recipes, everything that made Christmas special. But they didn't want me. In November, Julie called to ask about the guest list. We went through everyone, and I mentioned that I'd invited my neighbour Mrs. Henderson, whose family lived far away. "Oh," Julie said, sounding surprised. "We weren't planning on including neighbours this year. We want to keep it just family." Just family. But apparently I'd been downgraded from family matriarch to just another relative who needed permission to invite a lonely neighbour. 2 weeks before Christmas, Veronica stopped by to pick up some of my decorations. She looked around my house, which I'd barely decorated that year, and said, "It's probably nice to have a break from all this work, isn't it?" I nodded and smiled, but inside I was screaming. This wasn't a break. This was exile. The week before Christmas, I called John to ask what time I should arrive on Christmas Day. There was a pause. "We were thinking around 2 p.m., he said. "We're doing brunch style this year instead of a big dinner." Brunch style. 35 years of elaborate Christmas dinners, and they were replacing it with brunch. "That sounds lovely," I said. "Should I bring anything besides the green bean casserole?" Another pause. "Actually, Mum, Julie's trying a new green bean recipe this year. Maybe you could bring rolls instead?" Rolls. Store-bought rolls, probably. The woman who had orchestrated Christmas magic for 3.5 decades was being asked to contribute bread. But the final insult came 3 days before Christmas. I was at the grocery store, picking up ingredients for what I was now calling Martha's rolls, when I ran into my daughter-in-law's sister, Lisa. "I'm so excited for Christmas at John's house," she said. "Julie's been telling me about all the new traditions they're starting. It sounds like it's going to be amazing." New traditions. They weren't just taking over my Christmas. They were erasing it entirely. "I'm sure it will be wonderful," I managed to say. That night, I called John to confirm the time again and to ask if there was anything else I could bring. "Mom," he said, and something in his tone made my blood run cold. "Julie and I have been talking, and we think it might be better if it's just the immediate family this year. You know, parents and kids. Keep it small and intimate. Immediate family." I was the mother who had created this family's Christmas tradition, and I was no longer considered immediate family. "I see," I said quietly. "And by immediate family, you mean—" "Just the kids and grandkids," he said. "Julie's parents, of course. Martin's family. But we thought the grandparents might prefer a quieter day." Grandparents. As if Robert and I were some elderly relatives being politely excluded from the main event. "Of course," I said. "That makes perfect sense." But it didn't make sense. It was devastating. It was cruel. It was the final proof that my own children saw me as a burden they were finally free to cast off. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd spent countless hours preparing Christmas magic, and I realized something important. They thought they could replace me. They thought Christmas was about the food and the decorations and the house. They had no idea that Christmas was about love, tradition, and the woman who had poured her heart into creating something beautiful for 35 years. They were about to learn the difference. Christmas morning arrived grey and cold. For the first time in 35 years, I woke up in a quiet house with nowhere to be and nothing urgent to do. No turkey to check, no last-minute details to handle, no family arriving in a few hours expecting perfection. Robert and I sat at our kitchen table, drinking coffee in silence. We'd made plans to visit my sister in the evening, but the whole day stretched out before us, empty and strange. We could drive around and look at Christmas lights, Robert suggested. We could, I agreed, but neither of us moved. The silence felt wrong. Our house should have been filled with the sounds of cooking and preparation, the scent of cinnamon and sage, the excitement of a day I'd been planning for months. Instead, it felt like any other day. Worse than any other day, actually, because it was the day that used to be the most important day of my year. Around 11 a.m., my phone rang. It was my sister calling to wish us Merry Christmas. "How's the big day going?" she asked. I found myself lying. "Oh, busy as always. Just putting the finishing touches on everything." I couldn't admit, even to my own sister, that I was sitting in my pajamas with nothing to do, that my children had made it clear they preferred Christmas without me. After I hung up, Robert looked at me with sad eyes. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said gently. That's when I broke down. All the emotions I'd been holding in for months came pouring out. The hurt, the rejection, the feeling that 35 years of love and sacrifice had meant nothing to the people who mattered most to me. "They replaced me," I sobbed, like I was some employee who retired and they hired someone younger. Robert held me while I cried, and when I was done, he said something that changed everything. "Maybe it's time they learned what they lost." I looked at him through my tears. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said slowly, "maybe they need to understand that what you brought to Christmas wasn't just the cooking and decorating. Maybe they need to learn the difference between throwing a party and creating a family tradition." He was right. They thought they could replicate what I'd built, but they had no idea what actually made Christmas special. They saw the surface, the food, the decorations, the organized activities, but they'd missed the heart of it entirely. They'd missed the months of careful planning that ensured everyone felt included, the personal touches that made each person feel seen and valued. The way I remembered every dietary restriction, every family drama, every preference and quirk of 40 different people. They'd missed the love letters I wrote to go with each carefully chosen gift. The way I made sure the divorced cousins sat far enough apart to avoid conflict. The special cookies I baked just for the children who couldn't eat the regular desserts. They thought Christmas was about having a big meal and exchanging presents. They had no idea it was about weaving a family together with threads of tradition, memory, and unconditional love. Well, they were about to find out. I spent the rest of Christmas morning doing something I'd never done before. I planned my revenge. Not the angry, destructive kind of revenge. Something much more subtle and effective. I was going to let them have exactly what they wanted. A Christmas without Martha. But I was also going to make sure they understood exactly what that meant. By 2 p.m., when I should have been arriving at John's house with my store-bought rolls, I was instead sitting in my living room, wearing my best dress, sipping hot chocolate, and waiting for the phone to ring. It didn't take long. 3:15 p.m. John called. "Mum, weren't you coming today? Julie keeps asking where you are." "Oh," I said, sounding genuinely confused. I thought you said immediate family only. Robert and I didn't want to impose. There was a long pause. Mum, of course you're immediate family. We just meant we weren't inviting the extended relatives this year. I see, I said. Well, we've already made other plans now. But I hope you all have a wonderful time. Another pause. What other plans? We're visiting my sister later. She invited us for dinner when she heard we weren't doing Christmas this year. I could hear the panic creeping into his voice. Mum, there's been a misunderstanding. Of course we want you here. That's very sweet of you, I said calmly, but we wouldn't want to disrupt your new traditions. I'm sure Julie has everything under control. 4:30 p.m. Veronica called. Mum, John said you're not coming to Christmas dinner. What's going on? Your brother explained that you wanted immediate family only. I completely understand. Sometimes it's nice to keep things small. But, Mom, you are immediate family. You're our mother. Of course, dear. But you young people need to create your own traditions now. I'm sure whatever you've planned is lovely. 5:45 p.m. Danny called from his girlfriend's family dinner. Mum, what's this I'm hearing about you not being at Christmas? Oh, your siblings decided to host this year, which is wonderful. I'm so proud of them for taking initiative. But where are you? Are you alone? Robert and I are having a quiet day. It's actually quite peaceful. By 6 p.m., my phone was ringing constantly. John, Veronica, Julie, Martin. They were all calling, all confused, all suddenly very concerned about where I was and whether I was okay. Each time I was polite, understanding, and completely inflexible. I'd made other plans. I didn't want to impose. I was sure they were having a wonderful time without me. What I didn't tell them was that I was getting exactly the Christmas gift I'd wanted. Proof that they needed me more than they'd ever realized. The calls kept coming throughout the evening. By 8 p.m., I'd heard from everyone who was at John's house, plus several family members who weren't even there but had heard about the situation. My nephew called to ask if I was sick. My sister-in-law wanted to know if Robert and I had gotten into a fight with John and Veronica. Even my elderly aunt called to make sure I was okay. The story I kept hearing was the same. Christmas dinner at John's house had been a disaster. Julie had burned the turkey because she didn't know you had to baste it. The side dishes were either undercooked or oversalted. She'd forgotten to account for the vegetarians in the family, so half the guests couldn't eat most of the food. The decorations looked sparse and thrown together. She'd borrowed some of my ornaments, but she didn't know how to arrange them properly. The house looked more like a department store display than a warm family gathering. But the worst part was the atmosphere. Without me there to orchestrate conversations, manage personalities, and keep things flowing smoothly, people didn't know what to do with themselves. The divorced cousins got into an argument. The teenagers disappeared to their phones. The little children got cranky because there weren't any organized activities to keep them busy. By 4 p.m., people were starting to leave. By 5 p.m., half the family was gone. By 6 p.m., even John's own children were asking when they could go home. The magical Christmas I'd created for 35 years had been replaced by an awkward family gathering that everyone couldn't wait to escape. Mum, John said when he called the third time that evening, I think we made a mistake. What do you mean, dear? This whole thing, trying to do Christmas without you, it's not working. I let the silence stretch out, making him work for it. The thing is, he continued, we didn't realize how much you actually did, how much planning went into making everything run smoothly. I'm sure you'll figure it out, I said cheerfully. These things take practice. But we don't want to figure it out. We want you to do Christmas again. Oh, that's sweet of you to say. But you were right that it was time for the younger generation to take over. I'm actually enjoying having the break. This wasn't entirely true. I'd spent the day feeling hollow and sad, missing the chaos and joy that used to fill my Christmas. But I wasn't about to let them know that. Mom, please, we need you. Christmas isn't Christmas without you. There it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. They needed me. Christmas wasn't Christmas without me. But I wasn't ready to forgive them yet. They'd hurt me too deeply, dismissed me too casually. They needed to understand the full weight of what they'd lost. I appreciate you saying that, I said, but I think it's important for you all to create your own traditions now. I wouldn't want to get in the way. Over the next few days, the calls continued. Each of my children called separately to apologize, to explain, to beg me to reconsider taking back Christmas duties. They told me about the complaints they'd gotten from family members, how Julie had cried when the turkey came out black and dry, how the children had asked why Grandma Martha wasn't there to read the Christmas story, how even the adults had wandered around looking lost without my careful orchestration. Julie herself called to apologize. She was in tears as she explained how overwhelming it had been, how she'd had no idea how much work went into making Christmas look effortless. I thought it was just cooking a big meal, she sobbed. I didn't know about all the planning and timing and thinking about everyone's needs. I'm so sorry, Martha. I didn't mean to push you out. I felt a moment of sympathy for her. She really hadn't understood what she was taking on. None of them had. But sympathy wasn't the same as forgiveness. They'd made me feel unwanted and burdensome. They'd treated my life's work like it was nothing more than an outdated chore that needed to be modernized. They needed to sit with that feeling for a while. They needed to understand what they'd almost lost. I'm sure next year will go better, I told Julie kindly. You just need more practice. The truth was, I was already planning my return to Christmas, but it was going to be on my terms this time. They were going to have to earn back the privilege of my Christmas magic, and they were going to have to prove that they understood the difference between being invited to participate in my tradition and being graciously allowed to take it over. By New Year's Eve, the pressure campaign was in full swing. Every family gathering became an intervention. Every phone call was an attempt to convince me to take back Christmas. They'd enlisted allies. Robert was getting calls from the grandchildren, asking why Grandma was mad at Christmas. My sister was fielding questions about my mental health from worried relatives. The final straw came when my 8-year-old granddaughter, Emma, called me directly. Grandma Martha, she said in her serious little voice, Daddy says you might not do Christmas anymore. Did we do something wrong? My heart broke. This innocent child was blaming herself for her parents' stupidity. Oh, sweetheart, I said, you didn't do anything wrong at all. Grandma just thought the grown-ups wanted to try doing Christmas themselves this year. But it wasn't the same, she said. There weren't any of your special cookies, and nobody read us the Christmas story, and Mommy cried when the turkey got burned. Out of the mouths of babes. An 8-year-old understood what the adults had missed, that Christmas was about more than just having a meal together. Would you like Grandma to do Christmas again next year? I asked her. Yes! She shouted so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear, but only if you're not mad at us anymore. That's when I realized I was being unfair to the grandchildren. They'd done nothing wrong. They didn't deserve to lose their Christmas magic because their parents had acted foolishly. It was time for the negotiation phase of my plan. I called a family meeting for the first weekend in January. All the adults were required to attend. John and Julie, Veronica and Martin, even Danny, who had to drive up from his base. They arrived at my house looking like children who'd been called to the principal's office. Nervous, guilty, and hopeful all at once. I served coffee and cookies, my special Christmas cookies that they'd missed so much, and let them sit in uncomfortable silence for a few minutes. I've been thinking about our Christmas situation, I finally said, and I've realized that we need to have an honest conversation about what went wrong. They all started talking at once, apologizing and explaining and making excuses. I held up my hand for silence. Let me speak first, I said. Then you can respond. I took a deep breath and told them exactly how they'd made me feel. Unwanted, burdensome, dismissed, replaced by someone younger and supposedly better. For months, you made comments about how much work Christmas was for me, how I was getting too old, how it was becoming a burden. You made me feel like my greatest gift to this family was actually an inconvenience you were all too polite to complain about directly. Veronica started to protest, but I continued. Then, when I graciously offered to step aside and let you create your own traditions, you took that offer so quickly it was clear you'd been hoping for it. You were relieved to be free of your obligation to participate in my Christmas. The guilt on their faces was obvious now. But the worst part, I said, my voice getting stronger, was how you handled the actual transition. You wanted my recipes, my decorations, my knowledge, everything that made Christmas special. But you didn't want me. You treated me like a consultant you could call when you needed information, instead of the matriarch who created this family's most important tradition. Now they were all crying, even Martin, who usually stayed quiet during family drama. Mum, John said, we never meant to make you feel that way. But you did, I said simply. And then, when your Christmas fell apart, suddenly, you needed me again. Suddenly, Christmas wasn't Christmas without me. Julie spoke up through her tears. Martha, I had no idea what I was taking on. I thought Christmas was just cooking and decorating. I didn't understand about the planning, the timing, thinking about everyone's needs, making sure everyone feels included and loved. That's exactly right, I said. You saw the surface of what I did, but you missed the heart of it entirely. I looked around the room at these people I loved so much, despite their recent cruelty. Christmas isn't just a meal and some decorations. It's months of careful planning to make sure every single person who walks through my door feels valued and loved. It's remembering that Uncle Frank can't eat dairy, so I make special rolls just for him. It's seating divorced relatives far enough apart to avoid drama. It's buying specific gifts that show each person I've been paying attention to their lives all year. They were nodding now, understanding dawning on their faces. It's about creating an experience where 40 different people, from babies to great-grandparents, all feel like they belong to something magical. That doesn't happen by accident. It takes skill, experience, and love. I paused to let that sink in. Now, I said, if you want me to take back Christmas, we need to establish some new ground rules. They leaned forward eagerly, ready to agree to anything. First, I said, Christmas is mine to run. Not ours. Mine. If I'm doing the work, I make the decisions. No more comments about it being too much or too traditional or too anything. You participate gratefully, or you don't participate at all. They nodded frantically. Second, you will contribute what I ask, when I ask, how I ask. No substitutions, no improvements, no suggestions. If I ask for green bean casserole, you bring green bean casserole, not some new recipe you found on Pinterest. More nodding. Third, you will show up on time, stay until I dismiss you, and participate in whatever activities I've planned. No more checking phones. No more leaving early for other parties. No more complaining that it's too long or too boring. Of course, Veronica said quickly. Whatever you want. And finally, I said, you will never, ever make me feel like a burden again. Christmas is my gift to this family. If you don't want it, that's fine. But you don't get to make me feel guilty for giving it. They were all crying again, promising to do better, begging for another chance. But I had one more surprise for them. There's one more condition, I said, and they all held their breath. You're going to help me understand why you thought Christmas was better without me. The room went dead silent. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Finally, John cleared his throat. Mum, we never thought Christmas was better without you. I raised an eyebrow. Really? Because when I offered to step aside, you all jumped at the chance pretty quickly. They looked at each other, having some kind of silent conversation. Can I be completely honest? Veronica asked. I wish you would be. She took a shaky breath. We were worried about you. The last few years you seemed so stressed about Christmas, so overwhelmed. We thought we were helping by taking it over. I stared at her. Helping? You would start planning in October and worry about it until January. John added. You'd lose weight in December because you were too busy cooking for everyone else to eat properly. You'd be exhausted for weeks afterward. Julie nodded. The year before last, you cried when the gravy got lumpy. It was just gravy, but you acted like it was the end of the world. I remembered that. It had been a particularly difficult year. Robert had been sick, money was tight, and I was trying to make Christmas perfect despite everything falling apart. We thought, Martin said quietly, that you were making yourself miserable, trying to maintain something that had gotten too big and complicated. We wanted you to enjoy Christmas instead of just surviving it, Danny added. I sat back in my chair, stunned. All this time I'd thought they were tired of my Christmas, but they weren't tired of Christmas. They were worried about me. So you decided to stage an intervention, I said slowly. We thought if we took over the hosting duties, you could just relax and enjoy being a guest, John explained. Like other grandmothers do. Other grandmothers. They wanted me to be like other grandmothers, The ones who brought a side dish and went home early. The ones who didn't orchestrate magic, who didn't spend months creating perfect memories. Did it ever occur to you to ask me what I wanted? I asked. They looked at each other guiltily. We were afraid you'd say you wanted to keep doing everything, even if it was making you miserable, Veronica admitted. And she was probably right. I would have said that. Because Christmas wasn't just something I did, it was who I was. The Christmas Queen. The woman who made magic happen. But their intentions, however misguided, made their betrayal somehow worse. They hadn't excluded me out of malice. They'd excluded me out of pity. They saw me as a poor old woman who needed to be rescued from her own traditions. Let me tell you something, I said, my voice getting firm. Yes, Christmas is a lot of work. Yes, it's stressful. Yes, there are moments when I wonder if it's all worth it. They started to look smug, like they'd been proven right. But do you know what the difference is between stress and suffering? I continued. Stress is temporary discomfort in service of something you love. Suffering is being forced to give up the thing that gives your life meaning. The smug looks disappeared. Christmas isn't something I endure. It's something I create. The stress of planning the perfect meal isn't a burden. It's the anticipation of seeing everyone's faces when they taste my famous stuffing. The exhaustion of decorating every room isn't suffering. It's the joy of watching the children's eyes light up when they see the magical wonderland I've created. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at my barely decorated yard. You saw me cry over lumpy gravy and decided I was miserable. But you didn't see me smile when your father said it was the best gravy I'd ever made. You saw me lose weight in December and worried I was suffering. But you didn't notice how happy I was, how alive I felt, bringing joy to 40 people I love. I turned back to face them. You thought you were saving me from Christmas. But what you actually did was steal Christmas from me. You took the one thing I was proudest of, the one contribution I could make that nobody else could replicate, and you decided I was too old and weak to handle it anymore. The room was dead silent again. And then, I continued, when you realized you couldn't replace me, instead of admitting you'd made a mistake, you excluded me entirely. You decided it was better to have Christmas without the woman who created it than to admit you'd underestimated what she brought to the table. John was crying now. Mum, we're so sorry. We thought we were helping. I know you did, I said, sitting back down. And that's what makes this so hard. You had good intentions, but good intentions don't fix the damage that's been done. I looked around the room at these adults I'd raised, these people I'd poured my heart into for decades. You made me feel invisible, I said quietly. Like my 35 years of Christmas magic meant nothing. Like I was some outdated tradition that needed to be replaced by something younger and better. The crying was getting louder now. But here's what you didn't understand, I said. Christmas was never about the work for me. It was about the love. Every hour I spent planning, every dollar I spent on decorations, every moment of stress and exhaustion. It was all my way of saying, I love you to this family. Julie spoke up through her sobs. We love you too, Martha. That's why we wanted to help. But you didn't help, I said firmly. You fired me. From my own tradition, from my own life's work. I let them sit with that for a minute. However, I said, and they all looked up hopefully. I understand now that your intentions were good, even if your execution was terrible. Hope flickered in their eyes. So, here's what's going to happen, I continued. I'm going to take back Christmas. But things are going to be different this year. They leaned forward eagerly. First, I said, we're going to have an honest conversation about what Christmas means to this family. Not just the food and presents, but the real meaning, the traditions, the memories, the sense of belonging to something bigger than ourselves. They nodded. Second, you're all going to participate in creating that meaning, not just showing up and eating, but actively contributing to the magic. And I don't mean bringing a casserole. I mean understanding that every detail, every tradition, every moment of preparation is part of creating something special. More nodding. Third, if you're ever worried about me again, about my health, my stress level, my ability to handle something, you talk to me about it. You don't make decisions for me behind my back. You don't stage interventions. You have an adult conversation with the adult woman who raised you. We will, John promised. And finally, I said, you're going to help me make this Christmas the best one we've ever had. Not because you feel guilty, but because you genuinely want to be part of creating something beautiful together. Over the next hour, we planned the most elaborate Christmas in our family's history. Not just because I wanted to show off, but because I wanted them to understand the scope of what they'd almost lost. There would be 45 people this year, everyone who'd ever been invited, plus some new additions. We'd have 3 full meals over 2 days. Every room in my house would be decorated. There would be organized activities, group photos, and enough homemade cookies to feed a small army. But more importantly, everyone would have a job. Not busy work, but real responsibilities that contributed to the overall magic. John would coordinate with all the relatives. Veronica would manage the children's activities. Julie would assist with meal preparation under my direct supervision. Martin would handle setup and clean up. Danny would document everything with photos and videos. Everyone would understand exactly how much work went into making Christmas look effortless. Everyone would appreciate what I'd been doing alone for 35 years. This sounds like a lot of work, Martin said, and everyone held their breath. I smiled. Yes, it is. That's the point. Christmas magic doesn't happen by accident. It happens because someone cares enough to make it happen. We'll do whatever you need, Veronica said quickly. I know you will, I said, because now you understand what's at stake. You understand that losing Christmas would mean losing something irreplaceable. As they prepared to leave, each of them hugged me tighter than they had in years. They apologized again, promised to do better, swore they'd never make me feel unwanted again. But the real proof wouldn't come in their words. It would come in December, when we'd see if they truly understood what they'd almost lost. As I watched them drive away, Robert came up behind me and put his arms around my waist. Feeling better? He asked. Much, I said. They needed to learn that lesson. And I needed to learn that sometimes the people we love make mistakes with good intentions. Think they'll keep their promises? I smiled. They'd better. Because now they know what happens when Christmas doesn't have Martha. Now, before I tell you how this Christmas morning turned out, I want to know what you think in the comments below. Was I too harsh on my children? Should I have forgiven them right away? Or do you think they needed to learn this lesson the hard way? And if you've made it this far in my story, you clearly understand what it means to fight for family traditions and demand the respect you deserve. Show me your Team Martha by smashing that like button and subscribing for more stories about standing up to toxic family members. The ending of this story will prove that sometimes you have to lose something to truly understand its value. Let me tell you about the most magical Christmas morning of my life. That brings us to this Christmas morning. It's 5 a.m., and I'm in my kitchen, surrounded by my children and their spouses, all of us working together to create what will be the most magical Christmas our family has ever had. John is basting the turkey under my careful supervision. Veronica is arranging flowers in my grandmother's vases. Julie is rolling out pie crust, following my recipe exactly. Martin is setting up tables and chairs for 45 people. Danny is documenting everything, creating a record of how Christmas magic really happens. For the first time in years, I'm not doing everything alone. But more importantly, I'm not being pushed aside either. I'm the conductor of this orchestra, and every musician is playing their part with respect, gratitude, and joy. The grandchildren are upstairs, still asleep, unaware that the Christmas magic they almost lost has been restored and made even stronger. In a few hours, this house will be filled with 3 generations of family, all gathered around tables I've been planning since last January. They'll eat food I've been perfecting for 4 decades. They'll participate in traditions that stretch back to my own childhood. But this year, they'll also understand what they're really participating in. Not just a meal or a party, but a legacy. A testament to the power of one woman's love to create something that lasts for generations. They thought they could replace me with someone younger and less demanding. They learned that Christmas isn't about youth or convenience. It's about love, dedication, and the irreplaceable magic that comes from someone who truly understands what family means. My name is Martha. I'm 68 years old, and I am the Christmas Queen. Not because I appointed myself, but because I earned that title through 36 years of creating magic for people I love. And now, finally, they understand that some things can't be replaced, improved, or modernized. Some things are perfect exactly as they are. Some traditions are worth fighting for, even if you have to teach your own family what they're worth.